Welcome to the Bogosity podcast for the 30th of September 2013, the podcast with springs on its feet and cotter pins on its elbows. This is your host, Shane Killian, and joining me again this week is Tim Dyson.
Hey everybody, that's good to be back again.
So Tim, a couple of weeks ago when you were on the podcast, you made a statement causing certain people to call you a global warming denier. So I thought I'd give you a minute or two to officially respond to that.
Well, of course, it was mostly just misquoting. Saying I don't know the whole story equals a denial, which makes absolutely no sense at all. That does not mean that.
Right. Now, I don't know. Not knowing is passive. Denying is active. You have to actively say, I don't believe this, and I don't know just isn't strong enough.
Exactly, and the reason why I say I don't know is because the problem is the issue has got politics' hands on it, so a lot of what you hear can't be trusted, because I'm sure we've all learned trusting politicians to assess the situation is just foolish, because they have no vested interest in the truth. All they have a vested interest in is what's going to get me more political clout. You've seen it all the time in this thing. They've all proposed all things that just involve them getting more power that's not actually going to help anything, and solutions that may actually help are of course brushed aside if they aren't politically expedient for them.
Yeah. Well, and it's like a lot of this happens with people who keep calling themselves skeptics. But if you're a skeptic, you should always be ready to accept I don't know as an answer. I mean, that's what we want. We don't want people, when they don't have enough data to reach a conclusion, we don't want them just grabbing whatever. We want them to say, I don't know, and go with that. But, so many of them, it's like, if you don't absolutely jump on board with global warming, then you can't be a skeptic. Well, no, that's not what skepticism is. It's not about, agreeing with this list of conclusions. Global warming is true, homeopathy is bad, that sort of thing. It's not about the conclusions at all. It's about how you approach coming to those conclusions.
Exactly. People have this problem with I don't know as an answer. I've gotten this a lot in my debates online. Say, how is this going to be done without a government? I don't know. And they can't handle that because they think any answer is better than none, but that's not true at all. I don't know is a perfectly fine answer. Someone once said, there's no wiser words in the world than I don't know, because knowing what you know is one thing. Knowing what you don't know, that's something else.
Yep. That's the hard part.
But, to make it simple, is the world getting warmer? Yes, we know that pretty certainly. Are we causing it? Possibly. Can we stop it? Probably. Where we part ways is, so that means we need to give the government more money, more power to deal with it? That, I say, I don't think so, Tim. In fact, I would argue anyone really concerned about the environment should be working to take down government power. Because governments are by far the biggest polluters, and they enable some of the other worst polluters. Like people go on about the BP oil spill. I say, who guaranteed them protection from liability, thus encouraging them to do it? Who let them get away with it?
Well, and BP actually wanted to drill in much more shallow water where they knew they could do it safely, and government regulators said, no, you have to go out here in deeper water.
Oh yeah, and the clear-cutting, who's doing that? Governments who have no vested interest in the land, or landowners who would hurt the bottom line if they clear-cut? Who got in the way of nuclear power, which could have ended coal-burning plants? How many carbons in the air could have been prevented if that didn't happen?
But this brings us to our first item in News of the Bogus, which is a CNN article that's being passed around the skeptical community, which is a new assessment report from the IPCC saying that it's extremely likely that humans are responsible for at least half of the global warming. And the reason why I bring up this CNN report is because I want to point out something about how science is reported. And this is something that skeptics are taking at face value, and they're just passing it all around. And this even throws off scientists. The article says, quote, they are 95% certain of this, the surest they've ever been. And later says, quote, in 2007, the climate researchers were already 90% sure. What they're talking about is the p-value. So in 2007, their p was less than or equal to 0.1, and now it's less than or equal to 0.05. But they're pretending like it means that we were 90% and now we're 95% sure, and that's not what that means.
So what exactly is gleaned from this?
Well, if your p is less than or equal to 0.05, that does not mean you're 95% sure of your conclusion. it means there's a 95% chance that your measurements lie within the margin of error and a 1 in 20 chance that they lie outside. It's a statement of the accuracy of measurement, not confidence of the results.
So it's just confidence you haven't made a mistake somewhere, not confidence that the result is what you thought it was going to be.
Well, the result in that, we're 95% sure that the data lies between our error bars. That's what it means.
Okay.
But I think this is important to point out because in order to find out the probability of the conclusion given the evidence, you need to do a Bayesian analysis, and I haven't seen one of these done for climate change. And if anyone knows of one, please speak up in the comments or email it to podcast@bogosity.tv. But I want to take a minute to point out how this fools even scientists. So, Tim, I'm going to put you on the spot here and give you a word problem, okay?
Okay.
I know you didn't study. It might have been a while since math, but let's just think about this. You're a state trooper, and you've just pulled over someone you think is driving drunk, so you give them a breathalyzer test. Now, let's say your breathalyzer machine will show a drunk person as being drunk 95% of the time, but it will show a sober person as being drunk 5% of the time, so a 5% false positive. So you test the guy, the breathalyzer says he's drunk. What's the probability that he actually is drunk?
Now, offhand, you'd think probably 95% accuracy, but that's probably a trick to this, I would imagine, because you have to consider all possible cases here. It could potentially put him in the wrong group, wouldn't it? It would put him in the drunk group, even though he doesn't actually belong there.
So if there's that 5% chance that he's sober and just showing up as drunk, what do you think that would do?
Let's see. 50%, isn't it?
Okay, the real answer is you don't have enough information to make that determination, because you need to know what percentage of people drive drunk at any time.
Oh, yes, now I remember this old trick now.
Uh-huh. Yeah, see now, okay, so let's say that 1 in 1,000 people out there are currently driving drunk, 0.1%.
Like the coin flipping, it came up heads 6 times, tails 4 times, what are the odds? It doesn't actually matter, the prior results.
Well, it's actually trickier than that, because if that's the case, 0.1% are driving drunk, and your test shows a drunk person is drunk 95%, but a sober person is drunk 5% of the time. When you do the math, you find out the chances of him actually being drunk are, get this, less than 2%.
Because what the machine says doesn't matter. It's based on how many people out there actually choose to drive drunk. But you don't know this at the time.
Well, it does matter, but the people out there who are not drunk are such a bigger group than the people who are drunk, then that 5% of the people who are not drunk but are going to show up as drunk outweigh the number of people who are actually drunk. So the machine does help. It raises that probability from 0.1% to 2%, but not anywhere near as much as you'd think.
Okay.
And this throws off scientists. I mean, they've given similar tests. For example, one time they asked oncologists a similar question about a cancer test, and only 15% of them got the right answer. And most of them were saying that their tests were 80 or 90% or even 50%, and it was just way off.
Yeah, it's tricky. You can't always know everything, and you got to work with what you have, but probability always is a way of throwing you off like that.
Yeah, and we don't have very good probability brains as humans. We don't really intuit probabilities very well.
Oh, yeah. Anyone you've talked with about economics can tell you that.
Yeah. Or even just throw the old Monty Hall problem at them. You remember that one?
Which one was that?
That's the one where you've got 3 doors, and there's a prize behind one door, and you let the person choose a door, and then before you show it to them, you show them one of the doors that they didn't pick that has nothing behind it, and then ask them if they want to switch. And most people think it's 50-50, but actually if you switch, you actually double your chances of winning.
Ah, yeah.
Real hard to get your head around, but that's how probability works.
Oh, yeah. It's the secret to success to a lot of scammers out there.
Yeah. But I really wanted to point this out because a lot of skeptics out there are spreading this around, and they're all going, see, we're 95% sure humans cause global warming. No, that's not what that means. The probability has gone up. But by how much and what % sure we are humans are causing global warming, we just don't know, at least not from this one report, not until someone does a proper Bayesian analysis.
And as I pointed out before, even if it turns out we did cause it, it still leaves the other questions. Is it going to be bad? Can we do anything about it? And the most important of all, probably, if we can do something about it, would doing so cause more harm than good?
Exactly, yeah. Well, and there's also a question of how do you approach this problem? And most statists seem to, in typical statist fashion, want to approach the problem from the top down, stop people from using carbon or doing carbon credits or whatever, and trying to impose it top down. When this problem is a result of bottom-up forces, so wouldn't it make more sense to attack it more from the bottom up?
Exactly, and really, governments are the people who are engaging in war right now. I mean, for politicians to wag their fingers at you for driving an SUV while they're out irradiating countries, using napalm in Vietnam and all these other things, that's just a little bit hypocritical, though.
Yeah.
Never get the wrong idea. Capitalists like myself do care about the environment. We do live in this world as well. But what you need to understand is, it's better to focus on what you know for sure than what you don't. We're getting more information, we're learning more about this matter as we go. So, I think it's a question of priority. Focus on what you know for sure. And what I do know for sure is that politicians are the last people you should be trusting to take care of the world for us.
Yeah, I do not trust politicians, and fewer people are since this whole N.S.A. wiretapping stuff, which brings us to our next story. The New York Times is reporting that the N.S.A. has inserted a backdoor into the RSA security system. And if you're into security and you think of the big players in online security, RSA is up there. I mean, when you go to a website and it's HTTPS and it's encrypted and it's secured, it's probably an even bet that they're using RSA encryption of some kind. And so this claim from the New York Times is that the N.S.A. has inserted a backdoor, letting them automatically decrypt anything using this system. Again, I gotta point out a problem with the way news reporting works. This isn't quite true. We don't have any direct evidence that the N.S.A. planted a backdoor, but there are a lot of, as the old song says, things that make you go, And specifically, they're talking about the RSA's Be Safe toolkit, BSAFE, and it uses a standard from the NIST, which is one of their standards for a pseudo-random number generator, which no one in their right mind would use. Good encryption lives and dies on being able to generate quality random numbers, and it's been known since 2006 that this particular pseudo-random number generator, the numbers it generates aren't very random, and it's also a slower algorithm. So why would anyone in their right mind use this one? So for the longest time, security experts just figured, well, that's not going to be a problem. No one's going to use it. You'd have to be an idiot to pick this standard instead of the many better options that are out there. But apparently RSA did. And these people are not idiots. They're not dumb. So why did they pick that particular random number generator when it's got all these potential flaws? So that's why a lot of people are thinking backdoor.
Not really my field of expertise, but as soon as you said only an idiot would, you can probably guess the first thought that came to my mind.
What was that?
Some political crony who doesn't have to worry about getting in trouble for doing something stupid, because they never do have to worry about that.
No, maybe, but...
Yeah.
So RSA has officially released a statement to its developers saying, stop using this algorithm. And this, I should point out, this is only one of 6 pseudo-random number generators in Be Safe. There's no evidence it's been cracked. There's no evidence it was put in deliberately by the N.S.A. It's just something we found this is a potential problem and needs to be taken care of.
Oh, yeah. You can't trust them coming with information like that. You know, we've seen what they've done with it before. But it just goes back to the age-old rule. The only way to be totally safe, never put anything online that you don't want people to see.
That's true. Yeah, you put it out there and it's out there. But this is one thing that I think is a really good thing coming from Edward Snowden's leaks, is it's really gotten everyone on the alert about this issue. And so we're seeing a lot of these things that are coming out that might not have come out if he hadn't done that.
Yeah, it's funny, all the insecurity they've done, all the secrets they've kept, all it took was one guy growing a conscience, and I think it's a good sign, because now that he's done it, I think a lot more people are going to follow suit now that he's kind of cleared the way. So I hope we'll see more Edward Snowdens out there telling us what we need to know that the media certainly isn't going to tell us.
You're listening to the Bogosity Podcast. You say you don't like Bitcoin? Why not? Oh, because it's not gold. No problem. Just go to coins.bogosity.tv and you'll be taken to Coinable, where you can buy gold or silver coins or bars with your Bitcoins, with literally up-to-the-minute spot pricing. Now there's no reason not to jump on the Bitcoin bandwagon. Whether you're a Bitcoin miner, service operator, Bitcoin business owner, or market speculator, you can get gold and silver from reputable dealers. And Coinable has Bitcoin liquidity for fast processing of your order. Coinable even utilizes a special shipping infrastructure to ensure that your investment arrives safely at your door. And you know what? By going to coins.bogosity.tv, you won't pay a Satoshi more for your purchase. But you'll help this podcast. You can even sell your gold and silver for Bitcoin as well. Coinable is your Bitcoin to gold marketplace. So go to coins.bogosity.tv and start turning your Bitcoins into gold now. Welcome back to the Bogosity podcast, and we've got another crazy zero tolerance in school story. This one comes from WAVY10 and is called Has Zero Tolerance Gone Too Far? And personally, I think zero tolerance went too far when it was first introduced.
Oh yeah, that was kind of a no-brainer title when I saw it.
Really, I think it's just a way for school officials to avoid accountability for their actions by saying, hey, there's this zero tolerance policy. We didn't have a choice in the matter.
Oh yeah, it's a way to avoid having to use discretion, because when you use discretion, you could get in trouble if you make a bad call. But with this, you're totally covered.
Yeah. So what happened this time was that 3 7th graders from Virginia Beach were given long-term suspension from school for firing an airsoft gun on private property. Not on the school property, not on the school bus, not even at the bus stop. They were in one of the kids' yards. They were in there and they were playing with the airsoft guns.
How does this even fly? They have absolutely no jurisdiction there whatsoever.
I know. But they were suspended until June, which is basically the rest of the school year, so unless something else happens, they might end up having to repeat the grade.
Good grief. I mean, we used to play that sort of thing as kids all the time, and nobody cared. What the heck has happened?
Well, in these airsoft guns, they're not even as dangerous as BB guns, which fire, little metal BBs, little metal pellets. These fire little plastic things that, you'll never shoot your eye out with this thing. And they had a net set up so it wouldn't go outside the property so they could retrieve them. And they were just playing.
Who reported this to the school? I don't get how this sequence of events happened.
Well, there was a neighbor that called 911. Here's part of the 911 call. Quote, "He is pointing the gun, and it looks like there's a target in a tree in his front yard. This is not a real one, but it makes people uncomfortable. I know that it makes me uncomfortable as a mom to see a boy pointing a gun."
Well, let's see. Having nosy neighbors like that makes me uncomfortable. Can we ban you, please?
Yeah. So they were suspended for possession, handling, and use of a firearm. Later, the school changed that to possession, handling, and use of an airsoft gun.
And teachers keep saying they need higher salaries. It's like, why? You guys can't be trusted with what you already have, from what I've seen. This makes you look like a bunch of raving lunatics, and you want to teach our kids? Good grief.
Yeah. Well, one of the kids was Khalid Caraballo, and it was his yard they were on, and his parent, Solange Caraballo, said something that was a little bit disturbing. I kind of get where this parent's coming from, but the way it's worded is kind of creepy. It says, "My son is my private property. He does not become the school's property until he goes to the bus stop, gets on the bus, and goes to school."
Oh, dear.
So I guess if the school's going to claim our kids as their property when they're there, they have to at least let us claim them as ours when we have them.
Oh, don't encourage them. I know that's probably not what you meant, but really, don't encourage them.
And Khalid himself said, quote, "It's terrible. I won't get the chance to go to a good college. It's on your school record. The school said I have possession of a firearm. They aren't going to ask me any questions. They're going to think it was a real gun and I was trying to hurt someone. They will say, 'Oh, we can't accept you.'"
Oh, yeah, that is just absolutely wretched. There's this horrid entrapment element to the way it works here. You smoke some in college and they nail you. That's a checkbox you have to check for every job application for the rest of your life, which just dooms you to be unable to crawl out, and then you end up having to resort to crime. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but doesn't this look a lot like they're deliberately creating criminals just to keep fueling themselves?
Yeah.
Maybe consciously or unconsciously, but it all works out well in their favor this way, and that's why they do it.
Well, listen to what Virginia Beach School Board Chairman Daniel Edwards had to say. Quote, Somehow, student safety has taken a back seat in the intense media coverage of this case. This is not an example of a public educator overreaching. This was not zero tolerance at all. This was a measured response to a threat to student safety. What?
It's a gun. You can't hurt people with this. A point-blank shot would give you a little bit of a welt at most.
I mean, and it wasn't even on school grounds. It was, I mean, the cops didn't even do anything about it because they weren't breaking any laws. The only way they would have been violating the law is if they were shooting it so that the pellets went into other people's properties and they had the net set up to stop that.
So in other words, the principal didn't like that answer, so he took it all into his own hands like a child. I mean, how are kids supposed to learn from people who act younger than they are?
Yeah.
The only thing we should have zero tolerance on is stupidity like this.
You're listening to the Bogosity podcast from Bogosity.tv. Bogosity.tv and all of its services are hosted at GoDaddy.com. I've been a satisfied GoDaddy customer for over 10 years now. Their prices are great, and their 24/7 support is second to none, so I'm happy to be able to give you this special offer. Just sign up for any new domain, web hosting, email, or many other services and get 20% off by typing in the code WOWNOBOGON. That's WOWNOBOGON. Because there's nothing bogus about these savings on quality internet service. Get your own .com with a personalized email address or establish your online business in a snap, all for 20% off. And you'll help this podcast too. Just go to GoDaddy.com and use the code WOWNOBOGON. Welcome back to the Bogosity podcast, and we are talking about all things bogus, and especially this week's biggest Bogon emitter. And you know, sometimes I think it's called the Huffington Post because these people have to be huffing something to post all this drivel. Case in point, Jason Linkins backing up Sean O'Neill's article about what they say is the most ironic Kickstarter campaign ever. And what are they talking about? The producers of the Atlas Shrugged trilogy of movies using Kickstarter to help fund Part 3.
And how is this ironic exactly?
Well, as O'Neill puts it, quote, in an effort to further Ayn Rand's message critiquing altruism and promoting the virtue of selfishness, rejecting all moochers who would dare claim your money by tears, the producers of the third Atlas Shrugged movie have launched a Kickstarter campaign asking for donations predicated on reminding supporters of the critics who have heard it. Despite the free market repeatedly determining it would rather not have any Atlas Shrugged movies, producers Harmon Kaslow and John Aglioloro boldly refused to relinquish their rational self-interests to a world that would dare take their ideas from them, chiefly by not paying to see them.
Where do we even start here? Well, aside from his horrifically poor understanding of what Atlas Shrugged was about, I mean, I haven't even read it, but I can already tell this guy's never picked it up, so...
Yeah, I know enough about Ayn Rand's idea of what she meant when she talked about selfishness to know that this guy's taking it in completely the wrong direction.
Yeah, in other words, he looked at the title of it and jumped to his own conclusions. She doesn't say selfishness is absolutely good. It's just saying selfishness isn't necessarily bad, and that altruism isn't necessarily good.
Well, and she's also saying that selfishness can be a better motivator to do good things for other people.
Yeah, and we have actual proof of that. There's nothing theoretical about it. But whatever the case... Can anyone spot the huge flaw in his reasoning here? They're trying to undermine the free market by a Kickstarter campaign. No. Because if they get funding from Kickstarter, that would mean the free market does think it's valid.
Yeah, Kickstarter is part of the free market.
Okay, if they were getting a government grant to get the movie going, then maybe you would have a point there, buddy.
Yeah, and I mean, the free market didn't exactly say they don't want to watch this movie because the movie industry is just dominated by the MPAA. It's really, really difficult for independent films to actually get airings in a good number of theaters. And I don't know how many theaters Atlas Shrugged actually showed in, but I don't think it was that many.
Yeah, movies do badly for all number of reasons. People not liking it is only one of them. There's lots of great movies that didn't do well because they weren't well advertised, their timing wasn't good, they were kind of ahead of their time and people didn't get the message. Lots of reasons.
Well, like one movie that's been just a favorite of people for decades is The Princess Bride. And most people remember it for Mandy Patinkin's role. Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. And just lots of people absolutely loved this movie. It was pretty much a flop when it came out in the theaters. And it wasn't because the studio didn't like it or anything. They loved the movie. They just weren't sure how to advertise it given their structure, because it was a love story, but it wasn't really a love story. It was an action story, but it wasn't really an action story. It was a comedy, but it wasn't really a comedy. It was all of these things, but none of them primarily, and they just didn't know how to market it. But then when it came out on video, people started discovering this movie and buying it up in droves, and it's been really successful. And there have been plenty of movies that didn't make their money back on the theatrical run that made it back several times over on home video.
Oh, yeah, so this guy's just oversimplifying to the point where he just looks like an idiot.
Well, and he also says, and this is Linkins talking on the producer's response to all this, quote, "So, this is the good kind of asking for a handout. You know, the kind that comes when your first two movies don't provide you with the $250,000 you need to make the third. No, the good kind of handout is when people give the money voluntarily, and the bad kind of handout is when people go to the government to take people's money by force to give to them."
Yeah, and look at his response here. He states that very clearly, so this guy apparently just read his response and said, that's not what I want to hear, so I'm going to make up my own straw man. Real professional there.
Yeah. Actually, if you read the whole O'Neill article, the one Sean O'Neill wrote on it, he actually goes into this, and he talks about that distinction, and in his response, there's not even anything I can quote. He just kind of talks around it and hand waves, but he doesn't really have any response. This is the difference between rape and love making, people. It's not that hard.
Yeah. And when, I believe when Ayn Rand was asked about the issue of charity, sure, her answer was, in a free society, if you want to donate to a cause, you will not be stopped. That is in no way a moral condemnation of charity. I don't know where these people get that idea from.
Yeah. It's another way that statism poisons the mind. That's all I can say.
Yeah, it's like they just have this series of pre-programmed responses, and if you give them a response that doesn't correspond to what they think, their mind just has a misfire and just picks the closest one, as though you had said that.
It's what cognitive dissonance looks like.
Ugh, it's not pretty, and it's not healthy for you folks.
Well, let's talk about something good. It's nice to have good news, and here we have a rare treat. Another recipient of the only positive accolade this podcast has to give, the Silver Cluon Award. And this one's going to be a little bit different. Ordinarily, the Silver Cluon is given to people who deliver a sound debunking in a simple and unique way. In this case, the debunking is remarkably similar to so many others, citing the same facts and statistics and everything. But the award's given because of who is doing the debunking. And this is the sort of thing that I really think should be rewarded, not just by this little podcast, but by everyone everywhere. And this is CNN host Don Lemon, who changed his view on gun control after reading the research from the Centers for Disease Control. Previously, after the Sandy Hook school shooting, he had said, quote, "Who needs an armor-piercing bullet to go hunting? No one needs an assault rifle to go out and shoot a deer. No one needs an assault rifle that's capable of shooting 10, 20, 30 rounds off at the same time to shoot a duck or shoot quail. It does not make sense." And now he's gone against all of that. What he did was he cited the CDC's research, and he implored his listeners to challenge their views on it. And he said himself that it's making him rethink things. And there are a few points that he uses, like armed citizens are less likely to be injured by an attacker, defensive uses of guns are pretty common, and mass shootings and accidental firearm deaths account for a small fraction of gun-related deaths, and both are declining. So, this is kind of the stuff he was jumping on the bandwagon for. Oh no, there's all these school shootings, and they're just getting worse, we have to do something. No, the mass shootings are an anomaly, and there are actually fewer of them.
The problem is you have this huge imbalance with the statistics, because if a criminal would have robbed someone but then noticed he had a gun and backed off, that never gets reported, and yet, is that not potentially a life saved nonetheless? No one reports crimes that don't happen, so you have this huge imbalance, because if someone gets killed, yeah, that hits the news right away, but if a criminal gets scared off or something like that, it doesn't. So it's a bit of a stacked deck in favor of the gun control nuts. Whatever the case, I've always believed that You're entitled to believe what you want, just be consistent about it. Now, if you think people don't need assault rifles, that they're bad, okay, fine. But you have to apply that same logic to government and everyone else. They're humans just as well. So if we don't need those kinds of things, then you have to argue the military and all the others don't need them either. Otherwise, now here's where you've run into a problem.
Right. But he also pointed out that the majority of killing that happens with guns isn't being done by hunters or people in the military or whatever. There are people who, he says, are traditionally known to use weapons more frequently, and by that, I guess he means things like gangbangers who are out there shooting people up, because, the war on drugs is a big cause of a lot of this.
Because when people cite the number of Americans who kill Americans and that's bad, the thing is you need to look more closely. Which Americans are killing other Americans? Is it everybody? Are people shooting each other over parking spaces? No. The vast majority is gangs. America does not have a gun problem. It has a gang problem, and it needs to be addressed from that angle.
And I like what he kind of closed it off with. He said, quote, "Armed with just our cell phones, our fists, and our wits, are we setting ourselves up to be sitting ducks, defenseless in the face of a sane or an insane person, armed to the teeth and bent on killing?"
From someone at CNN, I'm truly impressed.
I know.
Good to see some professionalism at last and not these knee-jerk regulate everything reactions.
Well, and I'm just thinking back to when John Stossel was at ABC and he was doing Consumer Reports, and he started doing Consumer Reports government, giving them the same treatment that he gave to all these corporations that came out with fraudulent products or whatever, and how the people at ABC all of a sudden didn't really like him so much anymore, felt more, alone and at odds with everyone, and hopefully that won't happen with Don Lemon, but the gun control myths are pretty entrenched, and it might take a lot to get people through them, but maybe this is a start.
Well, even when people hated on John Stossel, look what we got out of it. We got one of the few sane, rational voices on the media that we still have today.
Right.
So if anything, it just drove him to dig even deeper, and look how much he uncovered. As I've said before, gun violence is a matter that involves serious thought and introspection, not knee-jerk, emotion-driven laws that you can't possibly see the consequences of.
So congratulations, Don Lemon, and enjoy your shiny new silver Cluon, and don't worry, you don't need a permit for it. History is written by the winners, and so apparently is economics. That's why there's Liberty Classroom. Probably the best single learning resource for history and economics on the web, Liberty Classroom teaches U.S. history, Western Civ, and economics from actual university professors. There's lots of free material to get you started, including introductory lectures on all these subjects. And when you sign up, you'll get the full site's content for just $99 a year, less than the price of 2 cups of coffee a month. And if you type in the promo code Bogosity in all caps, you'll get your first year for just $88. Lectures are available in both video and audio format, so you can watch or listen to them on your computer, your phone or tablet, or in your car. Learn at your own pace about the subjects you're interested in and become a more effective debater. You'll also get access to lots of supplemental materials and even the professors themselves via the discussion forum and even live video chats. Inform yourself against the myths and propaganda of our society. Visit libertyclassroom.com. Welcome back to the Bogosity podcast with Tim, Shane, and this week's
Idiot Extraordinaire.
And it's Nancy Pelosi once again.
She might as well have her foot surgically attached to her mouth.
And this was in her interview on CNN's State of the Union. Brace yourselves, folks. There's lots of fail here. Let's start with this one. Quote, "Well, none of us comes here to have more government than we need, so we should subject everything we do to real scrutiny to say, is this needed? Because most of it is an expenditure. So is this needed? Is it doing what it set out to do? Can we consolidate? We should again only subject and review what we do here to make the country work for the American people. I was making the distinction between those who say, how much government do we need, for those who say we don't need any government." Sound familiar?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, 2 weeks ago, 2 schmucks, to use Dave's word, Nick Hanauer and Eric Liu, who said, reasonable people debate how best to regulate or how government can most effectively do its work, not whether to regulate at all or whether government should even exist. No. We don't get to debate that part. We only get to debate how much government should grow.
Oh, yeah, if you ask all the wrong questions, then the answers don't matter.
That was from something. What was that from? That was from Gravity's Rainbow, wasn't it?
I don't remember.
I think it was Gravity's Rainbow. There was some quote like that. If you can get them to ask the wrong questions, then it doesn't matter what their answers are, or something like that. I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, I've heard it lots of times.
So this is a funny part, and she's talking about the people who are against Obamacare, quote, because they're anti-government ideologues who dominate the Republican Party. Oh, if only that were true.
Oh, yes, I'm an ideologue. I didn't study this. I didn't look at the moral consistency of this and all this sort of thing. I'm just an ideologue. I just tripped and hit my head one day, and all of a sudden I thought, hey, we shouldn't have government anymore.
Yeah. And Candy Crowley, who was interviewing her, said, they want to defund Obamacare. And Pelosi replied, no, they want to shut down the government. The effect of putting the Affordable Care Act on the bill is to shut down the government. They know that.
And why, supposedly, do we want to shut down government? I would love to hear this one.
Oh, I know why I'd love to shut down government.
Well, apparently she does.
Yeah, but this reminds me of a graphic that was going around Facebook a while back, and I forget exactly what it said, but it was basically that Republicans aren't against Obamacare because they really don't like Obamacare or they're opposed to it. And then it had all sorts of their real reasons, like they were racist and they didn't like Obama and, they wanted to, do this and do that and they hated the poor and all that sort of stuff. And it concluded with, they don't want to repeal Obamacare because they're afraid it won't work. They want to repeal Obamacare because they're afraid it will. I mean, that's just, like you said, being an ideologue. No one could possibly have a rational argument against my position, so I'm just going to throw all these insults at them about what I conclude them to be.
Well, let's see, people. I'm against Canada's healthcare system, and RPM is wider than the driven snow, so, yeah.
Yeah. And speaking of ideologues, listen to this next part. Quote, this is Pelosi again. I call them legislative arsonists. They're there to burn down what we should be building up in terms of investments and education and scientific research and all that it is that make our country great and competitive. And puppies and rainbows and unicorns and... Yeah,
and your programs don't burn anything down. You've never destroyed anything in your path to build whatever the heck it is you're building. Oh, no. Never happens.
No. Not wars, not taking private property without just compensation.
Not telling some business owner, no, you can't build that because we don't approve of it, and so on and so forth. Unbelievable.
She also said about the Republicans, quote, I don't paint them all with the same brush, but enough of them in their caucus to shut down government? That would be a victory for them. That'd be a victory for me.
I'm not racist, but...
you remember the shutdown under Clinton?
Which one was that?
It was from November 19th, 1995 to January 6th, 1996. The government was shut down and Earth didn't fall into the sun and there weren't floods and plagues of locusts, no 4 horsemen or anything like that.
Like that ridiculous The Purge movie. Can you say propaganda? I liked Larkin Rose's assessment of what would actually happen if government shut down. The vast majority of us probably wouldn't even notice.
That's exactly what Harry Brown said. There's this wonderful speech, if you can find it, called I Dreamed They Repealed the 20th Century. And in his dream, there's a libertarian president and the government gets shut down. And he talks about a Gallup poll on the matter. And he said something like, people were asked what they thought of the government shutdown. And something like 17% thought it was a bad idea. 19% thought it was a good idea. 6% or whatever it was had no opinion. And the remaining 52% or whatever it was had no idea the government had been shut down.
Sounds about right.
Love Harry Brown. If you can find that speech, take a listen to it. It's funny.
Yeah, I definitely should do that.
But, this is a threat that would not work against a libertarian president. The libertarian president vetoes their budget, so, well, we're going to shut the government down. Oh, no. Don't do that. I don't want you to shut the government down. No, Brad Fox, don't throw me in the briar patch.
You're going to love all these buzzwords. Arsonist? Really? Good grief. And of course, there's no arguments actually presented here. It's just a bunch of really strong words. She doesn't say, because we need the government and all this sort of thing, but she never says why. This is never argued from first principles, because these people have absolutely no idea what that even means.
Yeah, and they don't meet their burden of proof in saying, we need to use force against you. they keep putting the burden of proof on us to say, well, you have to prove we don't need the government. Well, how does that work?
Yeah, we're the status quo, therefore we're right. I've had to tell people the status quo has been a lot of things, not all of them right.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, I hear a lot of this from atheists, and I'm like, you know what? Religion has been the status quo for thousands of years. And, this upsurge of atheism is kind of a new thing. So if the status quo is right and we should go with government, doesn't that mean the status quo is right and we should all join whatever religion is dominant in our society?
Yeah, the thing is, the status quo has even contradicted itself. Once upon a time, monarchy was great, monarchy was needed. Now the status quo is that monarchy is insane.
Yeah.
Can't both be right.
Right. Well, back to Pelosi. Quote, "This isn't a good faith initiative. This is an excuse to, again, hand it all over to their friends, the insurance companies." Wait, excuse me? What? Well, come on. What is Obamacare if not one big handout to the insurance companies?
Yeah, he forced everyone to buy insurance from them. That'll show them. How can you even argue that? Good Lord.
Oh, man. And when she talks about raising the debt ceiling, the fail is going to come. Quote, "Well, first of all, it's an issue that really shouldn't be a conversation. The confidence that the world and the American economy should have, and that the full faith and credit of the United States of America should be without a doubt." Okay, one more issue we should just close off all debate about.
Oh, they. The debt ceiling. A lot of people really don't seem to understand what it means for the government to go into debt. You're running up a bill and then making the next generation pay for it. So the people who don't get a vote are stolen from by people who do get a vote. I challenge anyone to morally justify that.
Yeah.
And it also means you're wasteful resources. Like, people tell me, how do you know the government pollutes more than anyone else? And I tell them, because they deficit spend. If you know anything about economics, you know that means you're consuming more than you're producing. That alone is proof. Like, all the rest of us are limited in how much debt we can go into. The government is not.
But, this is like saying, oh, I need to convince people that I have good credit, and so in order to do that, I'm going to get another credit card and run it all the way up. What?
We got to drink the liquid to find out if it's poisonous. Good grief.
All right, well, are you ready for the capper?
I'm ready.
You want to be sitting down for this one. "There's no more cuts to make. It's really important that people understand that. We all want to reduce the deficit. Remember this, President Obama, when he became president, he said, 'I'm going to cut the deficit in half in 4 years.' He did it in 4 years and 3 months. But you cannot have any more cuts just for the sake of cuts."
Oh my God. You right now have the biggest government history has ever seen, and you're arguing that you can't make it smaller. That does not add up at all.
Well, and Obama cut nothing. Pelosi is pulling exactly the same lie that the Republicans have for decades. You grow government at a lower rate than you were planning to, and you call it a cut.
If you're in debt to the bank for $20,000 and you call them and you say, "I'm only going to go $10,000 in the hole next year," and say, what do you think the bank's going to say?
Yeah.
They're going to think you're insane and say, "You better pay up or we're calling the credit company."
Oh, but you'll have cut your deficit in half. Because that's what the deficit is. It's how much is added on to the debt every year, as opposed to the debt, which is the total amount you owe. So last year, you went $20,000 more into debt. That was your deficit. Now you have $20,000 more debt. The next year, your deficit is only $10,000, but you have $10,000 more debt. You haven't cut anything.
The large print giveth, the small print taketh away, people. Read that small print.
Well, that's why she keeps talking about the deficit and not, like, the budget. If she says we want to reduce the deficit, she doesn't say we want to cut the budget. That's what we're talking about.
Oh, yeah. I've seen plenty of things that could be cut, like the thing I read about the military. They got a bunch of money for these vehicles, but then it turned out they didn't need them. And guess what? The military's still getting that money anyway.
Well, military is so bloated. We have a military with like 5 or 6 times the budget of, I think it's China, that's the next biggest military on the planet. That's just bloat, people.
And what do you need that for? You've got friendly neighbors to the north and south, and 1,500 miles of ocean to the east and west. What are you under threat of that requires that much spending?
Oh, and we can't cut subsidies to big oil?
You'd think she'd be in favor of that, but apparently not.
Nope, I'll just bluster. What about farm subsidies?
Oh, yeah. They scream and moan they'll starve to death. Well, New Zealand says hi.
Yeah. I mean, there's all sorts of just ordinary budget things you can do. You can freeze salaries. You can have a policy of attrition where, as people leave or retire or whatever, you just don't hire replacements. That's how Gary Johnson cut a lot of jobs in New Mexico when he was governor. You could cut a lot of the waste just by paying federal employees electronically.
But that requires adapting to the times, and they're not interested in that sort of thing.
Yeah. Okay, you don't want to adapt to the times? I got you covered. The late 40s and 50s were the most prosperous years of the 20th century. In 1950, the federal budget, which was already way too big, mostly because of the New Deal stuff, was just over $42.5 billion. Adjust for inflation, that comes to about $413 billion in 2013 dollars. And that's just 11% of the current $3.8 trillion budget. There you go. Just past that budget, we'll have a prosperous economy, and we'll just be spending 11% of what we are now.
Oh, I can see the responses to that one now. Oh, we can't do that because we have a higher population now.
Why does it have to be per capita? No one's explained that to me.
Yeah, no, hard to say.
And I personally think the One Subject at a Time Act would do a lot here. Then you wouldn't have all these pork barrel riders stuck in all these unrelated bills. You wouldn't have these huge omnibus spending bills where it's just politicians with their hands in cookie jars, putting whatever they want on the end of this thing and just passing it all at once.
I like the 5-year-old rule. If you can't explain this law in a way that a 5-year-old would understand, it's out.
Yeah.
Because that's the problem. We do need to have rules. I've never denied this, despite what everyone loves to say. But the thing is, if you can't understand them, they're worthless. It's like playing a game where the rules are written in Chinese. You can't. If we have laws, they need to be understandable. I should be able to sit a kid down for 15 minutes, explain them all, and he'll understand. Even the experts on law can't understand them all. It's ridiculous.
Right, we covered a lot of that in our Supreme Court special. But it's not just the level of understanding, I can read this law and understand it. It's how many of them there are. I mean, these things just fill volumes that go on shelves and shelves and shelves. There are just so many of them, and they're so broadly written that they say that anyone in the country, without even realizing it, commits 3 federal crimes a day.
Oh yeah, they love it that way. It's a way to deal with people they don't like. You start some blog, you start saying mean things about them. They could dig up any law they want and effectively silence you without really running afoul of First Amendment, because they can say, oh no, it wasn't because you said something we didn't like, it's because you broke this law. Maybe that wasn't the intention from the start, but it just works out so conveniently for them that they just go along with it.
Yeah, and Nancy Pelosi says none of that can be cut.
Ridiculous. What would it do for the world if all governments had to balance their budgets, like the rest of us all do?
Yeah.
What would change if you want to introduce this new program? Everyone's taxes is immediately going to go up by a corresponding amount. So people actually saw what it's costing. They could properly assess whether it was worth it.
And all of that is why Nancy Pelosi beat out all other contenders for this week's
Idiot Extraordinaire.
Well, that wraps up this Once You Pop, You Can't Stop edition of the Bogosity podcast. Please visit the forums at bogosity.tv, where you can read the show notes and join the discussion on these and other subjects. This podcast is free but not free to produce, so please donate via PayPal or Bitcoin at the top of the bogosity.tv website or down the right-hand side of the podcast page, and give generously to keep this podcast going. And if you'd like to contribute to the podcast, just send a question, statement, news article, or rant to podcast@bogosity.tv. Put it in an audio file, and if it's good enough, it'll get played right in the podcast. Thank you for listening, and thanks for joining me, Tim Dyson.
Always a pleasure. Until next time, be aware and be wise.
And we'll leave you off with a quote from Ron Paul. We need to understand that the more government spends, the more freedom is lost. Instead of simply debating spending levels, we ought to be debating whether the departments, agencies, and programs funded by the budget should exist at all. The Bogosity podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 3.0 Imported License. Do you want answers to creationist claims against evolution? Would you like to know more about evolution yourself, or even engage creationists more directly, with actual peer-reviewed sources to back you up? My book, How Evolution is Scientific, is designed to show the basics of evolutionary theory and how it is so well supported using the scientific method. It's impeccably sourced, with references to the actual scientific material, and is arranged using the creationists' own criteria of what is scientific. Using their own arguments against them, see how evolution is scientific, but creationism is not, based on observations, accurate predictions, logic, and evidence. Get answers to common creationist claims, and even a primer on abiogenesis, the start of all life. It's all in my book, How Evolution is Scientific, available at Amazon and on Kindle, EPUB, and PDF as well. Get How Evolution is Scientific and never be taken in by creationists again.
I had one. Oh, dang it. I always forget.
That's why you take notes.
I have to remember to.
Then you have to take notes to remind you to take notes.
Yes. People always used to tell me, write stuff down. Says, I can't remember to.
It's like that old thing about you tie the string around your finger to remind you of something, but then you look at your finger and there's a string around it and you have no idea what the string was for.
That's my memory was the kind who would do that.